The pounding starts while Sophia is drawing at the kitchen table, her small hand gripping a purple crayon, her tongue poking out in concentration as she fills in the petals of a flower. Eleanor hears it from the bedroom where she is folding laundry, the cheap fabric of her work shirts rough under her fingers. 3 heavy thuds against the apartment door. Her body knows that sound before her mind catches up. Thomas. Her ex-husband has a particular way of knocking, or rather not knocking, but announcing, his fist connecting with the door like he owns it, like he owns everything on the other side of it. Eleanor moves quickly but quietly, not wanting to alarm Sophia yet, reaching the small living room just as his voice comes through the thin door, already elevated, already angry. "Eleanor, I know you are in there. Open the door. We need to talk about the money." Sophia's crayon stops moving. Her daughter's dark eyes, so like Eleanor's own, go wide and frightened. The little girl has heard this before, too many times before they finally left. Eleanor crosses to the door, checking that the chain lock is secure, and opens it the few inches the chain allows. Thomas fills the gap, his face flushed, his tie loosened, smelling of scotch even though it is barely 6 in the evening. She keeps her voice level, calm, the way she learned to do during the marriage. "Thomas, we can talk about this another time. Now is not good." His hand slams against the doorframe, and Sophia flinches behind her. "Not good? You think your schedule matters right now? You owe me $5,000, Eleanor. Money you stole from our account when you left. I want it back." She did not steal anything. She took half of what was in their joint account, money she had earned, and it was gone within 2 months, paying for this apartment and childcare and everything Sophia needed. But Thomas has rewritten history in his mind, the way he always does, making himself the victim of her abandonment rather than the reason for her escape. "Thomas, I did not steal anything and you know it. We can discuss finances through our lawyers." His laugh is ugly. "Lawyers? You cannot afford a lawyer. You can barely afford this dump." His eyes move past her, scanning the small apartment with its second-hand furniture and peeling paint. "What kind of life are you giving my daughter?" Sophia has abandoned her drawing now, sliding off her chair, grabbing Eleanor's phone from where it sits on the kitchen counter. Eleanor sees her daughter's small fingers working the screen. Her face set in determination, despite the tears starting to track down her cheeks. Sophia is trying to call her grandfather, Eleanor realizes, Thomas's father who actually cares about them, who slipped Eleanor money last month for groceries and made her promise not to tell his son. But Papa recently changed his number after getting too many spam calls, and Sophia is dialing from memory, her small fingers shaking. Thomas pounds the door again and the chain rattles. "You have until the end of this week, Eleanor. $5,000, or I start making your life very difficult. I will file for custody. I will tell the court how you are raising her in poverty, how unstable you are." Eleanor opens her mouth to respond, to somehow de-escalate this, when she hears it. A voice. Deep, male, unfamiliar, coming from her phone in Sophia's hand. "Hello?" Sophia's eyes are huge as she looks at the phone, realizing someone answered, but it is not Papa's voice. Before Eleanor can move, Thomas throws his weight against the door, and the old chain lock gives way with a shriek of tearing metal. Now please take a moment and subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from and what time is it. It is always fascinating to see where these stories get all around the world. Thank you. Alexander Sinclair was not a man accustomed to interruptions during his evening briefings, and he was even less accustomed to answering calls from unknown numbers. But something made him glance at the phone when it vibrated against the polished surface of his desk, made him pick it up despite James Lennox's presence across from him, made him answer with a curt hello that expected a wrong number or a telemarketer he could dismiss. Instead, he heard breathing, small and frightened, and then the sound of splintering wood and a man's voice rising in anger. Alexander's hand froze halfway to the whiskey glass he had been reaching for, his entire body going still in the way that made his enemies know they had miscalculated badly. James noticed immediately, his own posture shifting from relaxed to alert, but Alexander held up one finger, commanding silence, his attention narrowing to a lethal focus on every sound coming through the phone. The man, Thomas, was shouting now about money owed, about his rights as a father, about taking his daughter back, and beneath his tirade was a woman's voice, calmer, trying to de-escalate, the control in her tone betraying the fear underneath it. Alexander could hear a child crying, could picture the scene with perfect clarity, and something dark and cold settled into his chest. He had built his empire on information and leverage, on knowing when to push and when to wait, on reading situations and exploiting weaknesses, but this required no analysis. This was simple. A man was terrorizing a woman and a child, and Alexander was listening to it happen. He looked at James and made a sharp gesture, a silent command his lieutenant understood immediately, pulling out his own phone to begin tracing the call. Alexander listened as the woman, Eleanor he heard Thomas call her, promised money she clearly did not have, listened as Thomas grabbed her, heard the sharp intake of her breath and the child's scream, and his jaw tightened until he thought his teeth might crack. The sounds continued for another 2 minutes, Thomas making threats about custody and courts, and her inadequacy as a mother, Eleanor responding with a steadiness that Alexander recognized as hard-won survival skill, the ability to stay calm when every instinct screamed to fight or flee. Finally, Thomas left with a last vicious promise, and Alexander heard the door close, heard Eleanor's shaking breath, heard her comforting the child in a voice that trembled despite her efforts to control it. James looked up from his phone, nodded, mouthed the words, "Got it," and Alexander filed the information away for later, still listening as Eleanor seemed to remember the phone, as her footsteps approached, as the device was lifted, and he heard her frightened whisper of hello. He let her hear him breathing for a moment, let her know someone had witnessed what just happened, then asked in a voice he kept carefully controlled if she was safe now. She made a small sound, shock or fear, and Alexander found himself leaning forward as if he could somehow reach through the phone to assure himself she was unharmed. When he told her his name, gave her the information that should send any sensible person running, he heard her sharp intake of breath, heard the recognition and the new layer of fear, and felt something twist in his chest that he had not experienced in more years than he cared to count. Eleanor's hand trembles so violently she nearly drops the phone again, her fingers slick with the sweat of sudden terror, because she knows that name. Everyone in this city knows that name. Alexander Sinclair, the man who controls half the businesses on the waterfront, whose word can make companies flourish or collapse, who moves through the highest circles of power while everyone pretends not to know exactly where that power comes from. Alexander Sinclair. The Alexander Sinclair. Her mouth has gone dry and her heart is hammering so hard she can hear it in her ears. A frantic drumbeat that drowns out rational thought. "I am so sorry," she stammers, the words tumbling over each other in her haste to somehow undo this, to put distance between herself and the danger she has accidentally stumbled into. "There has been a mistake. My daughter, she was trying to call her grandfather. She dialed the wrong number. I am so sorry to have disturbed you." She is backing away from the phone even as she speaks into it, as if physical distance might somehow protect her. Sophia still clinging to her leg, her daughter's tears soaking through her jeans. "Mr. Sinclair, I apologize. We did not mean to. She does not even know what she is apologizing for. Only that she needs this man to forget she exists. To erase the last 10 minutes from history." His voice cuts through her panic like a blade through silk, quiet and controlled and utterly commanding. "Did that man hurt you?" The question is so direct, so unexpected, that Eleanor stops mid-sentence, her prepared apologies dying in her throat. The concern in his voice sounds genuine, which makes no sense, Because men like Alexander Sinclair do not concern themselves with domestic disputes in rundown apartments on the East Side. Did he hurt you, Eleanor? It is not really a question this time. And the sound of her name in his voice, dark and smooth and certain, does something strange to her pulse. Her arm throbs where Thomas grabbed her, and she looks down to see the marks already darkening into bruises, 4 distinct finger-shaped shadows against her pale skin. He grabbed my arm, she admits, because something about his tone demands honesty. But I am fine. It is handled. He is gone. We do not need help. Especially not from you, she does not say. But the words hang in the air between them anyway, because they both know what kind of help a man like Alexander Sinclair provides. And Eleanor has spent 3 years extracting herself and her daughter from violence. She will not invite more of it in, even if it comes wrapped in protection. She can handle Thomas. She has handled worse. The silence on the other end stretches long enough that Eleanor wonders if he has hung up. But then his voice comes again, measured and calm. I will send someone to check on you. You should not be alone tonight. The presumption in the statement sparks something in Eleanor, a flash of anger that burns through the fear, and her voice gains strength when she responds. No. Thank you, but no. I do not need anyone to check on me. I have survived worse than this, Mr. Sinclair. I do not need a criminal's protection. The words are out before she can call them back, before she can remember who she is speaking to, and Eleanor closes her eyes, waiting for the anger, for the threat, for the punishment that surely comes from insulting a man like him. Instead, she hears something that might be a laugh, low and brief and genuinely amused. Another silence, but this one feels different, weighted with consideration. When he speaks again, his voice carries something that might be respect. My number will remain in your phone, Eleanor. When you need help, and you will need it, call me. Before she can refuse again, before she can tell him that she will delete his number the second this call ends, the line goes dead. Eleanor stands in her small apartment with Sophia clinging to her leg, staring at her phone screen where an unknown number now sits in her recent calls. She should delete it. Every instinct of self-preservation screams at her to erase any connection to Alexander Sinclair, to pretend this never happened. Her finger hovers over the number. She saves it instead, typing in the name Alexander before she can question the impulse. And then she lifts Sophia into her arms and holds her daughter tight, breathing in the apple shampoo scent of her hair, trying not to think about what she has just done, or why some part of her, some small, reckless part she thought Thomas had beaten out of her years ago, wanted to keep that number, wanted to hold on to the memory of a dangerous man's voice asking with what sounded like genuine concern if she was hurt. 3 days slip by in a fog of exhaustion and calculation, Eleanor working double shifts at the bookstore while the bruises on her arm fade from deep purple to sickly yellow-green, a timeline of violence written on her skin that she hides beneath long sleeves even though the store is too warm, and Martha keeps giving her concerned looks that Eleanor pretends not to see. Her manager is a woman in her 60s who has worked at this bookstore for 30 years, who notices everything and asks nothing, who simply pats Eleanor's shoulder when she finds her in the storage room during lunch break, surrounded by crumpled receipts and a calculator, numbers that refuse to add up no matter how many times Eleanor runs them. Rent is due in a week, $950 she does not have, and Sophia needs new shoes because her toes are cramped in the old ones, and the utility bill is already 2 weeks overdue with a disconnection notice taped to her door. And somewhere in all of that, Eleanor is supposed to find $5,000 for Thomas, money she never took, money that never existed except in his imagination or his lies. Her phone buzzes during her afternoon shift while she is restocking the poetry section, and Eleanor's heart stops when she sees the unknown number, not the one she saved under Alexander's name, but different. And the text message is so simple, it takes her 3 reads to understand. A package has been left at your door. Her stomach drops to somewhere around her knees, and her hands go cold, because she knows without question who sent it, knows that Alexander Sinclair has just proven he knows exactly where she lives, knows her schedule, knows when she would be away, and she should be terrified. But what she feels is more complicated, a mixture of fear and something that might be anticipation or might be the first crack in her resolve. She wants to ignore it, to pretend the message never came. But curiosity is a living thing crawling under her skin, and desperation whispers that maybe whatever is in that box could be the answer she needs. That evening stretches forever, Eleanor picking Sophia up from Mrs. Chen next door, who watches her after school for $20 a week that Eleanor can barely afford but cannot do without. And when they finally climb the stairs to their third-floor apartment, Eleanor sees it immediately. A slim black box sitting against her door, expensive looking, no markings, no return address, just matte black cardboard that screams money and danger in equal measure. She brings it inside, her heart hammering so hard she can feel it in her throat, and she waits until Sophia is settled on the living room floor with her coloring books and crayons, her daughter humming while she draws another picture of princesses and castles, innocent and safe and unaware of the storm gathering around them. Eleanor takes the box to her bedroom, closes the door, sits on the edge of her bed that sags in the middle, and opens it with shaking hands to find a phone inside. Brand new, expensive. The kind of smartphone she has looked at in store windows and never dreamed of owning. And when she picks it up, she sees it is already activated with a single number programmed into the contacts. Beneath the phone, wrapped in neat stacks, held together with paper bands, is cash, more cash than Eleanor has seen in her entire life, and her hands shake so badly she nearly drops it as she counts. $1,000 in $100 bills. A note card rests at the bottom of the box, heavy paper, and the handwriting is masculine, bold, each letter formed with confident strokes. You need this. It is not a loan. It comes with no obligations. But if you need me, use the phone. It is secure. Eleanor stares at the money, at the phone, at the evidence of how easily Alexander Sinclair found her, how thoroughly he has inserted himself into her life, and she should be terrified. She is terrified, but underneath the fear is something more complicated, something dangerous. Because he listened to her humiliation on that phone call, heard every threat Thomas made, witnessed her fear and her daughter's tears, and instead of ignoring it like every other person in her life has done, like the neighbors who pretend not to hear the fights, like her family who stopped calling when she refused to leave Thomas the first 5 times, like the police who took a report and did nothing, Alexander Sinclair acted. Eleanor does not use the money, cannot make herself take it out of the box and spend it no matter how desperately she needs it, because using it would mean accepting something from Alexander Sinclair, would mean crossing a line she has promised herself she will never cross again. The line between independence and owing, between surviving on her own terms and becoming indebted to a man whose help comes with a weight she cannot yet calculate. She puts the box back, shoving it to the very back of her closet behind the winter coats she cannot afford to replace and the broken vacuum cleaner she keeps meaning to fix. And she tries to pretend it does not exist, tries to go about her life as if $1,000 is not sitting 20 feet from where she sleeps, as if the solution to every immediate problem is not wrapped in neat stacks waiting for her to surrender. But knowing it is there haunts her, a constant whisper in the back of her mind during every moment of the next 2 days, when she is measuring out Sophia's cereal in the morning and calculating how to make the box last another week, when she is walking past the shoe store and seeing the light-up sneakers her daughter wants in the window, when she is staring at the disconnection notice from the electric company and wondering if she can negotiate another extension. Thomas calls repeatedly, and Eleanor does not answer, watches his name light up her screen again and again, 8 calls on Thursday, 12 on Friday, and she deletes each voicemail without listening because she knows what they will say, knows the progression from demanding to angry to threatening that Thomas always follows, the escalation as predictable as it is terrifying. On the fifth day after the confrontation, Thomas appears at the bookstore during the afternoon lull when Eleanor is alone in the history section restocking the shelves, and he is too smart to make a scene in public, too aware of how he appears to outsiders, so he corners her between the stacks with his voice low and controlled and more vicious than any shout. "Time is up," he says, his breath coffee stale as he leans too close, invading her space the way he always has, the way that makes her want to run except there is nowhere to run to, with her back against the shelves. He knows she has money, he continues, because Eleanor always finds money when she really needs it, always manages somehow. And if she does not pay him the $5,000 by tonight, then he will take Sophia. He has already talked to a lawyer, a good one, and Eleanor is an unfit mother. Any judge will see that. A woman working minimum wage keeping his daughter in a two-bedroom apartment, in a neighborhood where gunshots echo on Friday nights, where the building has cockroaches and the heat only works half the time, while Thomas has a good job in medical supply sales, has a new girlfriend with a house in the suburbs, has stability and a future to offer their daughter. He will get custody easily, he promises, his smile sharp and certain, and Eleanor will be lucky to get supervised visits once a month. Every word is a knife sliding between her ribs, finding the soft, vulnerable places where her fears live. And Eleanor knows he is bluffing about some of it because Thomas has never been able to hold down a job for more than 18 months, and his new girlfriend is probably as temporary as the last 3. But she also knows he is not bluffing about all of it, knows that family court is unpredictable, and judges make decisions based on appearances. And Thomas has always been good at appearances, has always known how to present himself as reasonable and concerned while painting Eleanor as unstable. After he leaves, she makes it through the rest of her shift on autopilot, smiling at customers and ringing up purchases while her mind spins in desperate circles. And Martha takes one look at her face and sends her home early, pressing Eleanor's shoulder in silent support. Eleanor picks up Sophia from Mrs. Chen and holds her daughter too tight, breathing in the apple shampoo scent of her hair, and she makes dinner with hands that will not stop shaking, mac and cheese from a box because it is cheap, and Sophia loves it, and Eleanor cannot manage anything more complicated. That night, after Sophia falls asleep curled around her stuffed rabbit, Eleanor sits on her bedroom floor and retrieves the black box from the back of her closet, and she stares at the money and the phone for a long time, at the evidence of Alexander Sinclair's intrusion into her life, at the choice she knows she is about to make. Then she takes the money, counts out $5,000 with shaking fingers, and puts it in an envelope. But she also picks up her regular phone and pulls up the number she saved under Alexander's name, and she calls before she can change her mind. And he answers on the first ring, as if he has been waiting for her, as if he knew this moment would come. Alexander's voice is exactly as she remembers, deep and controlled with an undercurrent of something that makes her pulse jump in a way that has nothing to do with fear and everything to do with awareness. The kind of awareness she has not felt in years, not since before Thomas systematically destroyed her ability to trust her own judgment. She tells him she is using the money, the words coming out rushed and defensive, but that she will pay him back, every cent, even if it takes years, even if she has to work 3 jobs, because she needs him to understand that she is not the kind of woman who takes handouts, who becomes indebted, who trades one form of dependence for another. There is a pause on the other end of the line. Silence that stretches long enough that Eleanor wonders if he has hung up, and then he asks what happened, his voice careful, and Eleanor finds herself explaining, words spilling out faster than she intends, tripping over each other in their urgency to escape. She tells him about Thomas appearing at the bookstore, about the threats and the custody battle he is promising, about her fear that he might actually succeed, because Thomas has always been good at convincing people, at presenting the right face, at making Eleanor look unstable and emotional while he appears calm and reasonable. She tells him about the lawyer Thomas claims to have consulted, about the list of her failings Thomas recited like he had been preparing it, about the way her daughter asked her tonight why Daddy was so angry and whether it was Sophia's fault. And Eleanor's voice cracks on that last part, the crack revealing everything she is trying to hold together. She stops abruptly, horrified at herself, at the way she has just vomited her entire messy life to a man she does not know, a criminal, someone who should terrify her, and she does not understand why she is telling him anything, or why it feels safer to confess her fears to Alexander Sinclair than to anyone else in her life. Alexander listens without interrupting, without offering empty reassurances or asking stupid questions, and when she finishes, he asks a single question, his voice dropping lower, taking on an edge that makes the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Do you want this problem to go away? The way he says it sends ice down her spine because she knows exactly what he is offering, knows that a man like Alexander Sinclair could make Thomas disappear in the permanent sense, could solve her problem with brutal finality, and for one terrible moment she considers it, actually considers saying yes. Her voice is sharp when she answers, sharper than she intends, defensive against her own momentary temptation. No, she tells him. She does not want Thomas hurt. She just wants him to leave her and Sophia alone, to stop using their daughter as a weapon, to move on with his life, and let Eleanor move on with hers. Alexander makes a sound that might be approval, a low hum of acknowledgement, and he tells her he will handle it, his way, without violence. And she starts to ask what that means, what his way involves, but he talks over her smoothly. He wants to meet her, he says, the statement landing between them with weight. To discuss the situation properly, he continues, tomorrow evening, he will send a car. Eleanor's every instinct screams to refuse, to end this now before it goes any further, because she has already crossed too many lines and taken too many steps down a path she cannot see the end of, but she has also already taken his money, already called him, already pulled him into her life and let him see her weakness. And beneath the fear, beneath the voice of self-preservation, is curiosity she cannot name. A pull toward this man who listened to her humiliation and acted when no one else would. She agrees, the word barely a whisper. And after disconnecting, she sits in the dark of her living room and wonders what she has just set in motion. The next evening, a black car arrives outside Eleanor's apartment building precisely at 7, and Eleanor has changed clothes 3 times in the hour before, standing in front of her closet with growing frustration and hating herself for caring what she wears to meet a crime boss, for the way her hands shake as she pulls on and discards a blue dress because it seems too formal, then a casual shirt because it seems too dismissive, before finally settling on simple black pants and a dark green sweater that Sophia once said makes her eyes pretty. Her hair pulled back in a low ponytail because leaving it down feels too intimate, minimal makeup because she refuses to look like she is trying too hard, even though she knows she is trying exactly that hard. Sophia is with Martha for the evening, the older woman asking no questions when Eleanor requested the favor, but squeezing her hand in a way that says she understands something important is happening, that she trusts Eleanor to be careful, and Eleanor wishes she had that same trust in herself as she descends the stairs to where the car waits, gleaming black and utterly out of place on her shabby street, where Mrs. Chen is already peering through her curtains with undisguised curiosity. The driver is professional and silent, a man in his 40s with the build of someone who could break bones if required, but who holds the door for her with perfect courtesy. And Eleanor slides into the back seat of the most luxurious vehicle she has ever been inside, all buttery leather and dark wood trim, the seats heated against the October chill. The windows tinted so dark that the outside world becomes shadowy and distant. The drive takes 20 minutes through the city, moving from her neighborhood where graffiti decorates the corners and bars cover the windows to areas that grow progressively cleaner, wealthier, more removed from the reality Eleanor lives every day, and she watches the transformation through the tinted glass, feeling the distance between her world and Alexander Sinclair's world growing with every block. The car stops at a restaurant Eleanor has passed on the bus, but never dreamed of entering. The kind of place with a single elegant sign and no prices on the menu that gets posted online, where making a reservation requires knowing someone who knows someone, and her stomach twists with nerves. The driver escorts her not to the main entrance where a valet stand glows with warm light, but to a private side door, unmarked and discreet. And inside, a manager in a suit that probably costs more than Eleanor makes in a month materializes to greet her by name, leading her through the quiet kitchen where chefs work with focused intensity, past gleaming stainless steel and controlled chaos, to a private dining room at the back. And there, rising from a chair as she enters, is Alexander Sinclair. Eleanor's first thought is that he is not what she expected, and then immediately that she should have expected exactly this, because even knowing his reputation, hearing his voice, she was not prepared for the physical reality of him. He is tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that fill out his dark suit in a way that speaks of power contained, dark hair silvering at the temples in a way that adds distinction rather than age, sharp features that might be harsh except for the way he softens them slightly when he sees her, and eyes so intensely blue they seem unreal, like colored contacts, except she knows somehow that they are not. He wears a perfectly tailored dark suit that fits him like it was made for his body, which it probably was, the kind of tailoring that costs more than 3 months of her rent. Charcoal fabric with a subtle sheen, white shirt open at the collar, no tie, and the casual refinement is more devastating than formal dress would be. But it is his presence that stops her breath more than his appearance, the way he commands the space without effort. The sense of barely leashed power and absolute control, danger wrapped in perfect civility, like a blade in silk. He moves toward her, extending a hand, and his voice in person resonates deeper than over the phone, vibrating through her chest when he thanks her for coming, when he says her name, Eleanor, like he has been thinking about it, practicing the syllables, and she takes his hand because refusing would be obvious cowardice. His grip is warm and controlled, his palm rough in a way that surprises her because she expected softness from a man who clearly has people to do things for him, and she feels the contained strength in his fingers, the way he could crush her hand, but instead holds it gently, and she fights to keep her voice steady when she tells him thank you for the invitation. Eleanor barely tastes the food, though each course is clearly expertly prepared, too aware of Alexander's attention fixed on her like a physical weight, like sunlight concentrated through glass, burning and illuminating at once, and she finds herself hyper-conscious of every movement, the way she lifts her fork, the way she reaches for her water glass, wondering what he sees when he looks at her so intently. He asks about Sophia between courses, his questions specific and thoughtful, not the generic inquiries strangers make about children, but real interest in who her daughter is, what makes her laugh, what she dreams about, and somehow his genuine curiosity disarms Eleanor more effectively than any threat or intimidation could, because she was prepared for danger, but not for this. Not for him actually caring about the details of her small, ordinary life. She finds herself talking about her daughter's obsessive love of drawing, how Sophia covers every available surface with her art, how she announced last week that she wants to be an artist when she grows up and live in a studio with 100 windows. And Eleanor hears the warmth in her own voice, the unguarded affection she usually keeps contained, because talking about the good things feels like inviting fate to take them away. Alexander listens like every word matters, like he is cataloging each detail to examine later, and he asks follow-up questions that prove he is actually paying attention, not just performing interest while waiting to talk about himself or steer the conversation where he wants it. And Eleanor realizes with a start that she cannot remember the last time someone listened to her this way, really listened, not even Martha, who is kind but busy. Certainly not Thomas, who always made her feel like her words were an imposition. Alexander tells her a little about himself in return, carefully edited, she is sure, but enough that he becomes slightly less terrifying and slightly more human, and he mentions growing up in this city when it was rougher than it is now, learning early that power is the only reliable currency, building his business from nothing into something that cannot be ignored or destroyed, And the way he talks about the weight of responsibility, about the people who depend on him, makes it clear that however he earns his money, he takes seriously the fact that dozens of families survive on the decisions he makes. When the plates are finally cleared and coffee is offered but refused, the conversation shifts, the air in the private dining room growing heavier, more charged. Alexander leans back in his chair, his posture deceptively relaxed but his gaze sharpening, focusing on her with renewed intensity, and he tells her he has looked into Thomas Greville, his voice matter of fact, as casual as if he is discussing the weather. The man is $8,000 in debt from gambling Eleanor did not know about, has been skimming money from his employer to cover the losses, and his new girlfriend is actually his married coworker, whose increasingly suspicious husband is a police detective. Alexander continues, laying out each fact with precision. Thomas is projecting his own failures onto Eleanor, trying to take from her what little she has because he has systematically destroyed everything else in his life. And Alexander can use any or all of this information to make Thomas disappear from her life permanently, not through violence but through strategic pressure applied at every weak point, until Thomas is too buried in his own problems to even think about bothering Eleanor again. And it would be simple, requires nothing more than a few phone calls, some evidence delivered to the right people. Eleanor absorbs this information, the casual thoroughness with which Alexander has dissected Thomas's life in less than 24 hours. The way he has identified every weakness and vulnerability with surgical precision. And she should be appalled at this demonstration of how completely someone's privacy can be violated, how easily a life can be taken apart by someone with enough resources and motivation, but instead, what she feels is guilty satisfaction, dark and fierce, because Thomas deserves to face consequences, and she is tired of being the only one who suffers them. She asks what Alexander wants in return, her voice steady despite her racing heart, because the fundamental rule of her life has been that nothing comes free, that every gift contains an invoice that eventually comes due, and she needs to know what she is agreeing to before she lets him act on her behalf. Nothing, he says, the single word landing between them with impossible weight, and Eleanor's eyes narrow with automatic disbelief, because no one does something for nothing, especially not men like him. Men whose entire existence is built on transactions and leverage and knowing exactly what everything costs. Alexander's expression shifts, something that might almost be a smile touching his mouth, not quite warm, but not cold either, something between amusement and appreciation, and he says smart, like he is genuinely pleased that she questioned him, that she did not simply accept his offer at face value, and then he admits the truth, his voice dropping lower, more intimate. He wants to know her, he says, to see her again, to have more evenings like this one, more conversations where she looks at him like he is dangerous but interesting rather than simply a monster to be feared or a tool to be used. This meeting, this help he is offering, it is because he has not been able to stop thinking about her voice on that phone, about her courage in the face of Thomas's threats, about her refusal to break even when breaking would have been easier and more understandable, and there is something in the way he says it that makes Eleanor's breath catch in her throat because she realizes he means it, that this is not manipulation or strategy, but actual honest desire. Eleanor's breath catches and her pulse hammers in her throat because this is more dangerous than owing him money, infinitely more dangerous, because owing him money has a clear ending, a point at which the debt is paid and she can walk away clean. But this, whatever this is, does not have boundaries or limits or a clear exit strategy, and she should refuse, should stand up from this table and walk out of this restaurant and never look back, because getting involved with Alexander Sinclair is signing up for a life she never wanted and complications she cannot afford. Instead, she hears herself asking why her voice barely above a whisper, because she needs to understand what he sees when he looks at her, whether this is real or some kind of elaborate game she does not know the rules of yet. Alexander leans forward, closing some of the distance between them, close enough now that she can see the lighter blue ring around his pupils, the faint scar through his left eyebrow, the exact way his jaw tightens when he is choosing his words carefully. Because you told a man whose name makes killers nervous that you did not need help from a criminal, he says, his voice low and intense and absolutely certain. Because you have every reason to be broken, to be bitter and defeated and small, and you are not. You are fierce and protective, and you refuse to let your circumstances define what you are capable of becoming. Because when I heard your daughter crying, and your fear underneath the control, something I thought I had buried a long time ago woke up. Something that wants to stand between you and everything that would hurt you. And I have not felt that in more years than I can count. The honesty in his words stuns Eleanor into silence, her breath trapped somewhere between her lungs and her throat. And this man, this dangerous man, who orders violence as casually as other people order coffee, is looking at her with something raw and unguarded in his expression, something that makes him seem younger and more vulnerable than should be possible for someone with his reputation. And she does not know what to do with it, does not know how to respond to naked honesty from a man who should be all calculation and manipulation. Finally, she tells him that her life is complicated enough without adding him to it, that she is grateful for his help, truly grateful in a way she does not have adequate words to express, but that anything more than this single dinner is impossible because she has Sophia to think about and a life to protect, and she cannot afford the kind of complications that come with being involved with someone like him, and even saying it feels presumptuous, because what makes her think he wants involvement rather than just a passing interest that will fade once the novelty wears off? Alexander nods slowly, accepting her words, but his eyes never leave hers, that intense blue gaze holding her pinned like a butterfly on a board. And he tells her he understands, that he knows what he is asking and what it would cost her, but that the offer stands regardless. Dinner and conversation and getting to know each other. Nothing more, unless she wants more. And he will handle Thomas regardless of her answer, because that is not conditional. That is simply what needs to happen, because men like Thomas need to learn that there are consequences for terrorizing women and children. Eleanor studies him, looking for the lie, for the manipulation she knows must be hidden somewhere in this offer, because her entire life has taught her that nothing comes without strings, that kindness is always a prelude to control. But what she finds in his face is only patience, a willingness to wait for however long it takes, and the realization that he means it, that he will actually let her set the pace and the boundaries, does something strange to her chest, makes it hard to breathe for entirely different reasons than fear. Against every instinct, against every lesson she has learned about self-preservation and keeping her distance from dangerous things, she agrees to one more dinner, just dinner. Nothing more than conversation and getting to know each other as he suggested. But she needs him to understand that she cannot promise anything beyond that, cannot commit to something when she does not even know what it would look like or whether it is sustainable. Alexander's satisfaction is evident in the slight softening of his expression. The way his shoulders relax fractionally, though he controls the reaction quickly, keeping his response measured, and he simply says, that is all he asks. One more chance to see her, to talk, to let this thing between them develop naturally or not at all. He has his driver take her home after dinner, but he walks her to the car himself, his hand light on her lower back, barely touching but burning through the fabric of her sweater like a brand, and the touch is simultaneously protective and possessive in a way that should alarm her, but instead sends heat pooling low in her belly, a reaction she has not felt in so long she almost does not recognize it as desire. As the car pulls away, Eleanor watches him through the rear window, Alexander standing in the pool of light outside the restaurant, hands in his pockets now, watching her go with an expression she cannot quite read, and she does not let herself think about what she is doing, what she is agreeing to, until she is back in her apartment, back in her normal life with its shabby furniture and peeling paint, and the sound of her neighbors arguing through the thin walls. Then the reality crashes down like a wave, cold and undeniable, that she is involved with Alexander Sinclair, that she has crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed, that her life is never going to be the same simple struggle it was before. The next day, Thomas calls her, his voice panicked instead of angry for the first time since she has known him, high and tight with fear. And he tells her to forget the money, to forget everything he said, that he is sorry. He was stressed and scared about his own problems, and he took it out on her when she did not deserve it, and he would never really try to take Sophia. She has to believe that. He loves his daughter, and he knows Eleanor is a good mother. His desperation is obvious, practically vibrating through the phone line. And Eleanor does not ask what changed, does not need to, because she knows exactly what happened. Knows that Alexander kept his promise with a thoroughness that has left Thomas terrified. She tells Thomas they will communicate through a co-parenting app from now on. Everything documented and recorded, supervised visits only until he proves stability over a period of at least 6 months. And if he ever threatens her again, if he ever shows up at her home or her work uninvited, she will pursue a restraining order and full custody. And does he understand? Thomas agrees to everything, falling over himself to accept her terms, and after she hangs up, Eleanor sits with the knowledge of what Alexander did, how quickly he did it, how thoroughly he dismantled Thomas's ability to hurt her, and she should be horrified at the demonstration of power, at how easily he reached into someone's life and destroyed it. But what she feels instead is relief so intense it makes her dizzy, and gratitude, and something more complicated that she is not ready to examine. She picks up the phone Alexander gave her, the expensive, secure phone that represents a direct line to a world she should not be touching, and sends a simple text, just 2 words, "Thank you." His response comes within seconds, like he was waiting for her message, like he has been holding the phone hoping she would reach out. "Have dinner with me Friday." Eleanor stares at the message for a long time, her thumb hovering over the keyboard while she types and deletes 4 different responses. Everything from elaborate explanations of why this is a bad idea to simple refusals to attempts at setting more boundaries. But finally, she settles on the only response that matters, the only one that is honest. Where? Friday arrives too quickly, and Eleanor spends the days between that text message and the actual evening cycling through every possible way this could be a mistake. But when the black car arrives outside her building at 7, she gets in anyway, her heart hammering against her ribs like it is trying to escape the cage of her chest. And Alexander sends a car again, but this time the destination is not a restaurant. The driver taking her to a building in the most expensive part of the city, all glass and steel and understated wealth. Eleanor's heart hammers harder as the elevator rises to the top floor, the numbers climbing higher than she has ever been in her life, and it opens directly into his home, not into a hallway, but into the penthouse itself. And the space is stunning, in a way that makes her apartment seem even more pathetic by comparison, all floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city like a kingdom spread out below. Modern furniture in dark colors that probably cost more than she makes in a year. Art on the walls that even Eleanor's untrained eye recognizes as expensive, the kind of pieces she has only seen in museums. But it is also somehow warm, despite the obvious wealth, lived in rather than sterile, with books on the shelves that look actually read rather than decorative, their spines creased and worn, a blanket thrown over the back of the leather couch in soft gray cashmere, a half-finished glass of whiskey on the side table next to a folded newspaper, signs of actual life rather than just a showpiece. Alexander is waiting in the open kitchen that flows into the main living space, cooking, and the sight stops Eleanor in her tracks completely because he wears jeans, dark and perfectly fitted, but still jeans, and a dark charcoal sweater with the sleeves pushed up to reveal strong forearms, corded with muscle and scattered with faint scars, and the casualness of it, the domesticity, is so unexpected that she cannot process it for a moment, cannot reconcile this image with the dangerous crime boss in the perfectly tailored suit. He looks up from whatever he is stirring on the gleaming stove, sees her expression, and something like genuine amusement crosses his face, softening the hard lines into something almost boyish, and he tells her he thought she might be more comfortable here than somewhere public, that after 2 restaurant meetings he wanted her to see him in his actual space, and that he likes to cook, finds it relaxing after days filled with problems and decisions, and he promises he is quite good at it, his tone almost teasing. Eleanor moves into the space cautiously, feeling like she is entering a dream or possibly a very elaborate trap, drawn forward by the smells coming from the kitchen. Garlic and wine and something rich and savory that makes her stomach clench with hunger she did not realize she was carrying. And Alexander watches her approach with that focused attention she is starting to recognize as distinctly his, like she is the only thing in the world worth observing. He gestures to a stool at the kitchen island, tells her to sit, pours her a glass of red wine from an open bottle without asking if she wants it, just assuming. And normally that kind of presumption would irritate her. But somehow when he does it, the gesture feels like care rather than control, like he is taking care of her rather than making decisions for her. Eleanor sits and watches him move around the kitchen with competence that speaks of genuine skill rather than hobby cooking, his movements efficient and sure, and she asks what he is making, needing to fill the silence with something safe and ordinary, and he tells her coq au vin, that his mother taught him to cook when he was young, before everything changed, before he became what he is now. And there is something in his voice when he mentions his mother that is softer than anything Eleanor has heard from him before, grief and love mixed together in equal measure. She wants to ask what happened, what changed, what turned a boy who learned to cook from his mother into the most feared man in the city. But she does not have the right to those questions yet, does not know if she will ever have that right. So instead, she sips her wine and lets the rich complexity of it bloom across her tongue, better than anything she has ever tasted. And watches Alexander cook for her in his penthouse above the city and tries to understand how her life became this, became sitting here with him like this is normal, like she belongs in this space. Eleanor accepts the wineglass he hands her and takes a small sip to steady herself, the rich depth of it warming her throat, and she settles onto the stool he indicated, watching him move through the kitchen with a confidence that speaks of genuine skill rather than performance. His movements economical and practiced as he stirs something in a copper pot that fills the penthouse with fragrant steam, and she finds herself relaxing incrementally despite the strangeness of being here in his private space, in the home of a man whose business is violence and control, because there is something disarming about watching him cook, about the way he tastes the sauce on a wooden spoon and adjusts the seasoning with a slight frown of concentration, utterly focused on getting it right. He tells her about learning to make this particular dish from his mother when he was 12, how she insisted that a man who could feed himself well would never be dependent on anyone else, and there is affection in his voice when he speaks of her, a softness that transforms his features into something less dangerous and more human, and Eleanor asks without thinking if his mother is still alive, then immediately regrets the question when she sees his expression close slightly. She died when he was 17, he says after a pause, his hand stilling on the knife he was using to chop herbs, and that was when everything changed, when he had to make choices he never imagined making, had to become someone his mother would not have recognized, and the grief in his voice is old but not diminished, the kind that has been carried so long it has become part of the foundation of who he is. Eleanor reaches across the island without planning to, her hand covering his briefly in a gesture of comfort that surprises them both. And when his eyes meet hers, they hold an intensity that steals her breath, a heat that has nothing to do with the stove and everything to do with the awareness crackling between them like electricity before a storm. He turns his hand under hers, his fingers curling around hers for just a moment, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a touch that is both gentle and possessive. And then he releases her and returns to cooking as if the moment did not happen, though the tension in the air has shifted into something more charged, more dangerous in ways that have nothing to do with his reputation. The meal is ready soon after, and he serves it with a care that speaks of wanting to impress her, arranging the chicken and vegetables on pristine white plates with an attention to presentation that makes Eleanor smile despite herself. And when they move to the dining table positioned near the windows, with the city spread below them like a carpet of lights, she realizes that this, sitting here with him eating food he made while they talk about ordinary things, feels more intimate than anything she has experienced in years, more real than her entire marriage to Thomas ever was. Alexander asks about her childhood, her family, what led her to the bookstore, and she finds herself telling him about her parents, who died in a car accident when she was 22, about meeting Thomas shortly after, when she was still grieving and vulnerable, about recognizing too late that he saw her isolation as opportunity rather than tragedy, and Alexander listens with that complete focus that makes her feel like she is the only person who exists in his world at this moment. When she finishes talking, she expects pity, but what she sees in his face is understanding and a quiet fury on her behalf, and he tells her that men like Thomas are predators who seek out the wounded because they are too weak to face anyone with full strength, and that she is stronger than she knows to have survived him and built a life for Sophia despite everything. Eleanor accepts the wine and sips it carefully, the rich complexity coating her tongue as she watches Alexander move with practiced ease through the kitchen, and she realizes this version of him is somehow more dangerous than the suited crime boss in the restaurant, because this feels real, feels like she is being allowed to see behind a carefully maintained facade, and the intimacy of that terrifies her more than his reputation ever could. He plates the food with care, explaining that it is chicken marsala, something simple but one of his favorites. And when they sit at the small table near the windows with the city lights spread below them like scattered diamonds, Eleanor realizes she has never felt quite like this before, suspended between fear and fascination, drawn to a man she knows she should run from, but cannot seem to make herself leave. The conversation flows easier than it should, Alexander asking her about her favorite books since she works in a bookstore, and she finds herself telling him about her love of old novels, stories where the endings are not always happy but always feel true, and he listens with that intensity that makes her feel like she is the only person in his world. And when he tells her about his own reading habits, philosophy and history mostly, things that help him understand power and how it moves through the world, she sees the intelligence behind the danger, the mind that built an empire from nothing. They talk through the meal and after, moving to the couch with fresh wine, sitting closer than they were at dinner. And Eleanor knows she should maintain distance, but cannot seem to make herself do it, drawn by gravity she does not fully understand. And when Alexander reaches out and tucks a strand of hair behind her ear that has escaped from her ponytail, his fingers lingering against her jaw, she freezes, her breath catching in her throat. He asks if she is afraid of him, and she considers lying, but tells him the truth instead, that she is afraid of what he makes her feel, of how easily she could fall into this and lose herself. And his expression shifts into something fierce and tender at once, and he tells her that he will never ask her for more than she wants to give, that she has control here even if it does not feel like it, and the promise in his voice makes something in her chest crack open. Eleanor sets down her wine glass with a trembling hand and admits that she has not felt wanted like this in so long, she has forgotten what it feels like. That Thomas spent years convincing her she was worthless and difficult and too much trouble, and Alexander's jaw tightens with anger not directed at her, and he tells her that Thomas was a fool who could not handle a strong woman, so he tried to break her instead, but that she is not broken, she is extraordinary, and Eleanor feels tears prick her eyes at the fierce conviction in his words. Alexander moves to pour her a glass of wine from an open bottle on the counter, something red that catches the light like liquid rubies, and Eleanor accepts it with fingers that tremble slightly, acutely aware that being here in his private space crosses a line she cannot uncross, that this intimacy is more dangerous than any business arrangement could be because it feels real in a way nothing has felt real in years. She perches on one of the bar stools at the kitchen island, watching him work with movements that speak of genuine competence rather than performance. The way he tastes the sauce simmering on the stove with a critical expression that makes her lips twitch despite her nerves, and when he catches her almost smile, he pauses, wooden spoon still in hand, and tells her she should do that more often because it transforms her face into something luminous. The compliment catches her off guard, makes heat rise in her cheeks, and she deflects by asking what he is making, and he explains it is coq au vin, something his mother taught him before she died. And there is such affection in his voice when he mentions his mother that Eleanor sees past the dangerous exterior to the man who still misses someone he lost decades ago. They talk while he cooks, conversation flowing easier than it should between a single mother and a crime lord. And Eleanor finds herself telling him about the bookstore, about her favorite customers, including an 80-year-old woman who only reads spy thrillers, and a teenager who comes in every week to read the same graphic novel because he cannot afford to buy it. And Alexander listens with that complete focus that makes her feel like she is the only person who exists in his universe at this moment. He plates the food with care, arranging it with an attention to presentation that surprises her, and they move to the dining table positioned near the floor-to-ceiling windows, where the city spreads below them like a carpet of stars. And Eleanor realizes that up here in his domain, she feels safer than she has felt anywhere in years, which should terrify her, but instead fills her with a warmth that has nothing to do with the wine. Alexander asks about her parents, about her life before Thomas, and she finds herself explaining about losing them in an accident when she was barely out of college, about meeting Thomas shortly after, when she was drowning in grief, and he seemed like a lifeline, about realizing too late that he saw her vulnerability as opportunity rather than tragedy, and Alexander's expression darkens with a fury that is not directed at her, but at the man who exploited her when she was broken. Eleanor pauses, wine glass halfway to her lips, and asks him why he cares, why a man like him would involve himself in the messy, complicated life of someone like her. And Alexander sets down his fork and looks at her with those impossibly blue eyes, and tells her that from the moment he heard her voice on that phone, heard her fear and her strength existing simultaneously, he has not been able to stop thinking about her, that she woke something in him he thought was dead. And Eleanor's breath catches, because she recognizes the truth in his words, even as her mind screams that this is impossible, that men like Alexander Sinclair do not fall for struggling single mothers who work in bookstores and can barely make rent. Eleanor feels the tears threatening to spill and blinks hard against them, refusing to cry in front of him, even as his words crack something open inside her that has been sealed shut for years, and Alexander moves closer on the couch, close enough that she can feel the heat of him, and his hand comes up to cup her face with a gentleness that seems impossible from a man with his reputation, his thumb brushing away the single tear that escapes despite her efforts. She should pull away, but instead finds herself leaning into his touch. Starved for tenderness, she has denied herself since leaving Thomas. And when Alexander asks if he can kiss her, his voice is rough with restraint. And Eleanor knows this is the moment where she decides, where she either runs from this dangerous, impossible thing, or surrenders to what she has been feeling since she first heard his voice on that phone. And she makes her choice by closing the distance between them herself, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that starts gentle but quickly deepens into something fiercer, something that tastes like need and possibility and danger all at once. Alexander's control fractures, and he pulls her closer, his hand sliding into her hair to release it from the ponytail, his other arm wrapping around her waist, and Eleanor gasps against his mouth at the intensity of sensation, at how alive she feels for the first time in years. And when they finally break apart, they are both breathing hard, foreheads pressed together, and Alexander's voice is strained when he tells her that she has no idea what she does to him, how she has consumed his thoughts for days. And Eleanor admits in a whisper that she has thought of nothing but him either, that she lies awake at night replaying their conversations, that he terrifies her not because of who he is, but because of how much she wants him despite it. Alexander kisses her again, slower this time, thorough and claiming. And Eleanor feels herself melting into him, her hands sliding up his chest to curl into his sweater. And when he pulls her onto his lap, she goes willingly, her legs straddling his hips, and the position brings them flush together in a way that makes her acutely aware of his arousal and her own answering heat. And Alexander's hands settle on her waist, holding her steady, his eyes searching hers for any sign of hesitation. Eleanor knows she should hesitate, should think about Sophia and consequences and the impossibility of this. But in this moment, with Alexander's hands on her and his taste on her lips and the city lights glittering behind him like a promise, she cannot make herself care about should. And when he asks if she wants to stop, she shakes her head and kisses him again, deeper this time, communicating without words that she wants this, wants him, wants to feel something other than fear and exhaustion for once in her life. Alexander guides Eleanor to sit at the kitchen island, pouring her wine with movements that speak of ease in this space, and she watches him finish preparing dinner with a competence that makes him seem less like the feared crime lord whose name people whisper, and more like a man who finds solace in creating something with his own hands. And when he plates the food and carries it to the dining table near the windows, she follows on unsteady legs, hyper-aware of how intimate this feels, how different from their first meeting in the restaurant's private room, where the formality created distance. They eat slowly, conversation flowing between comfortable silence and stories that reveal more than Eleanor intends. And she finds herself telling him about the dreams she had before Thomas, about wanting to open her own bookstore someday, with a reading corner for children and author events and the smell of coffee mixing with old paper. And Alexander listens with that intensity that makes her feel like her small dreams matter to him, and when he tells her he could make that happen, could set her up with everything she needs, she feels the familiar panic rising because she cannot be bought no matter how much she wants what he offers. Alexander sees her withdrawal immediately and reaches across the table to cover her hand with his touch warm and grounding, and he tells her he is not trying to buy her or control her, that he simply wants to give her what she deserves, what she has been denied by circumstance and by men who took instead of giving. And Eleanor looks into those impossibly blue eyes and sees sincerity mixed with desire and something deeper she does not have a name for yet. She pulls her hand back gently and tells him she needs to build her own life, that accepting his help with Thomas was necessary for Sophia's safety. But anything more would make her dependent again, would make her lose the autonomy she fought so hard to reclaim. And Alexander nods slowly, processing, then asks if she would accept his help if she earned it, if he employed her in some capacity that let her pay her own way while working toward her dream. Eleanor's first instinct is to refuse, but she forces herself to consider it, to separate her knee-jerk fear of obligation from the practical reality that opportunities like this do not come along, and she asks what kind of work he means. And Alexander explains he owns several legitimate businesses, including a chain of upscale hotels that need managers and coordinators, positions she could learn even without experience. And the offer is genuine enough that Eleanor finds herself actually considering it, instead of immediately rejecting it. They move to the living room after dinner, Eleanor carrying her wine and settling on the couch with more ease than she felt earlier. And Alexander sits close enough that she can feel his warmth, but not so close that she feels crowded. And the conversation shifts to lighter topics, books and movies, and the strange little moments that make up a life. And Eleanor realizes with a start that she is enjoying herself, that for the first time since she can remember, she feels relaxed and safe and seen. Alexander tells her about losing his mother when he was 16, about how she was the only person who saw past what he was becoming to who he really was underneath. And the grief in his voice is old but still sharp. And Eleanor understands that kind of loss, that ache for someone who believed in you. And without thinking, she reaches out and touches his hand in comfort. Alexander's touch grounds her, and he turns his hand to thread his fingers through hers. the simple gesture more intimate than anything she has experienced in years. And he tells her about his father, who disappeared when he was 8, about growing up too fast in neighborhoods where survival meant becoming harder than the people around you, about the choices he made that led him down a path he can never fully leave no matter how many legitimate businesses he builds on top of the foundation of blood and violence. Eleanor listens with her heart aching because she recognizes the grief of a childhood stolen, the weight of becoming an adult before you are ready. And she tells him about her own father who drank himself to death when she was 12, about her mother who worked 3 jobs and still could not make ends meet, about how she thought Thomas was stability and safety, until she learned that control masquerading as care is its own kind of prison. They sit with their hands joined and their histories laid bare between them. Two people who clawed their way up from nothing and carry the scars to prove it. And the connection Eleanor feels terrifies her because it is real in a way nothing has been real since before Sophia was born. Alexander shifts closer, and his free hand comes up to trace the line of her jaw. His touch feather light, as if she might shatter, and he tells her he knows she is afraid. That he is afraid too, because he built his life on control and certainty, and she makes him feel neither controlled nor certain about anything, except that he wants her in whatever way she will allow. Eleanor's breath catches because the vulnerability in his admission mirrors her own, and when she looks into his eyes, she sees past the dangerous reputation to the man underneath, the one who cooks dinner in his own kitchen and keeps books on his shelves and listens to a stranger's crisis on a misdirected phone call because a child was crying. She makes a decision then, one that feels like jumping off a cliff with no certainty of landing safely, and she tells him she is terrified of this, of him, of how much she wants something she knows she should not want, but that she cannot seem to make herself walk away. Alexander's expression transforms, relief and desire, and something deeper flooding his features, and he asks if he can kiss her again, always asking, always giving her the choice. And Eleanor answers by leaning in and pressing her lips to his with more confidence than before, pouring into the kiss everything she cannot yet say aloud. His arms come around her and pull her close until she is pressed against his chest, feeling the steady hammer of his heart. And the kiss deepens into something that feels like a promise neither of them is ready to name, but both of them desperately want to keep. When they finally break apart, Alexander rests his forehead against hers, both of them breathing hard, and he tells her they can go as slowly as she needs, that he will follow her lead, but that he needs her to know this is not casual for him, that she has gotten under his skin in a way no one has in years. Eleanor nods, because words feel inadequate for the enormity of what is building between them,